Hello, and thank you for your interest in the Humanities Connections Grant Program offered by the National Endowment for the Humanities. I'm PC Fleming, a program officer in the Division of Education Programs and part of the leadership team for Humanities Connections. This recorded webinar is intended to help you put together your application to the 2024 Humanities Connections Program. We will highlight some parts of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, a PDF that you can download from the NEH website. The NOFO is the official document inviting applications for this program. We will also help you navigate the landing page on the website so that you have a sense of the links and resources there. I'll turn it over to my colleague Hannah, who will explain the basics of the program and who can apply.
Thanks, PC. I'm Hannah Schell, also a program officer at NEH and on the leadership team for Humanities Connections. So before you watch any further, you might be wondering if Humanities Connections is the right grant for you. The Humanities Connections program seeks to expand the role of the humanities in undergraduate education at 2- and 4-year institutions by encouraging partnerships between humanities faculty and their counterparts in other areas of study, including the physical and natural sciences, pre-service or professional programs like law and business, or computer science, data science, other technology-driven fields. So only colleges and universities can apply to Humanities Connections, and your project must include both humanities and non-humanities faculty. If you're working for a nonprofit organization, or if your project doesn't include both humanities faculty and faculty outside the humanities, then this isn't the right grant for you. Humanities Connections supports sustainable curricular programs, most often majors, minors, certificates, although we also support pathways through majors or general education programs. If you're thinking about a short-term project that won't be sustained by your institution after the grant period, then you might consider a different NEH grant. NEH offers more than 40 grant programs, and we can help you find the right one. So send us an email at education@neh.gov, and we can help you find a grant that's right for you. But if you are interested in Humanities Connections, my colleague Sarah will now highlight some important dates.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm Sarah Booney-Michaels, and I'm the third member of the Humanities Connections leadership team. If you have additional questions after this webinar, please join us for a live Q&A session at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, June 27th. The link is posted in the Notice of Funding Opportunity and on the program page just below this video. You can also reach out to us at any time through the program's email address, hc@neh.gov. There's a real person monitoring this inbox. In fact, it's usually me. You can send us questions and we'll answer them as quickly as we can. And as with most NEH grant programs, you can also send us a complete draft or part of a draft or a sketch of your idea. We'll put you in touch with a program officer in our division and provide feedback on your application before you submit it. The draft deadline for this program is July 25th. We can't provide feedback on anything received after that date, but if you send it to us before July 25th, we're happy to speak with you. So that's a quick overview of the dates. Now back to PC to hear more about the program.
Thanks, Sarah. If you're interested in Humanities Connections or any other NEH grant, the website is the place to start. Each NEH grant program has its own page where you can find everything you need to know about the grant program and how to apply. On the left side of the program page, just below the name of the grant, is a prose description of what this grant program aims to do. As Hannah mentioned, Humanities Connections seeks to expand the role of humanities in undergraduate education at 2- and 4-year institutions. What sets this grant apart from other awards is that Humanities Connections requires collaboration between faculty both within and outside the humanities. Humanities Connections projects should integrate the subject matter, approaches, and learning activities of 2 or more disciplines with a minimum of 1 in and 1 outside the humanities. As we envision this program, students enrolling in the program you develop should experience the kinds of assignments that characterize the disciplines involved. Maybe that's laboratory research or field work or problem sets or whatever depends on the disciplines you are using. On the NEH website, you can see a full list of projects that this grant has funded. Humanities Connections has supported colleges and universities who are creating curricula in interdisciplinary humanities areas like medical and health humanities, environmental humanities, and digital humanities. We've also funded projects about ethics and the professions and building modern language tracks into engineering programs. That's only a small sample of what we've funded, and you certainly shouldn't feel limited to those areas. We welcome innovative collaborations in any area that fits the guidelines you just heard. If you watched this far, you might have a good idea for a project that Humanities Connections can support. The other thing to consider before you start your application is eligibility for this program. Humanities Connections is an organizational award, which means that you must apply through an eligible institution. The institution is the applicant, not you as an individual. An applicant to Humanities Connections must be an accredited U.S. institution of higher education, either public or private with 501c3 status. This includes both 2- and 4-year institutions. You cannot apply to this grant as an individual, and you also can't apply as a nonprofit organization or a local government. NEH does have other grant programs, though, so if you're interested in applying as an individual or an organization other than a university, please feel free to reach out to us and we can point you to another program. On the top right on the program page on the NEH website, you'll find the grant snapshot. You'll see that this is a grant program for organizations and that it supports curricular and faculty development. You'll also notice that the program includes 2 funding levels. We'll say more about those in just a moment. Under the grant snapshot, you'll also see the deadline. This year, applications are due September 5th. As Sarah mentioned, the draft deadline is July 25th. It's not required to send us a draft, but many applicants find it useful to do so. So if you've got a project in mind and you're applying from an eligible institution, the rest of this video will help you get started with your application. I'll turn things over to my colleague Hannah to explain the steps.
So as you've seen, the website gives you the basic overview of the program. So we'll now turn to the longer and more official document, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which we call the NOFO, or sometimes the Program Guidelines. Most of the rest of this webinar will focus on the NOFO. And so if you'd like to follow along, you can download the PDF on the program page. It's at the bottom of the page under Step 1. This webinar should not be a replacement for the NOFO, and we won't cover every single detail, but we will give an overview and will help you navigate the document to find what you need. So let's start with an overview. The NOFO begins with an executive summary, which will include the information we just went over, including the purpose of the grant, the 2 levels, the deadlines, and the allowable project start dates. Below the executive summary, you'll find the table of contents. The first 3 sections tell you about the program. The 4th section tells you what you need to apply, including a table of items to make sure you've included everything you need for a complete application. And the 5th section tells you how your proposal will be reviewed. The NOFO's first section describes the purpose of the grant. This section repeats some of the language on the program page, and it also distinguishes between the 2 funding levels, planning and implementation. So let's talk about those. Once you've decided to apply to Humanities Connections, you'll need to choose which level you're applying to. This decision doesn't have to do with the content of your project, but rather what stage it's in. So if you are thinking about applying at the implementation level, you'll need to include, quote, unambiguous evidence of prior planning work. In other words, you'll need to convince peer reviewers that you've been working on this project and that you've made substantial progress. You don't have to have had a grant at the planning level to apply for an implementation award. Some institutions have taken this path, but it's not a requirement. Whether you had a planning grant or not, an implementation application should have the project rationale and the logistical objectives clearly laid out, and you should have evidence of support from your institution and from your collaborators. An implementation award can last for up to 3 years, and you should be ready to enroll students by the end of that period. So if you don't think you can check all those boxes, then you're probably better off at the planning level. At that level, we see a range of proposals. Some have an excellent idea that's just getting started. Others have been working on their idea for several years, but need support to line up a few key elements before they can implement it. As long as you make a case that your timeline is feasible, either could be successful at the planning stage. You can read more about the differences between planning and implementation in the NOFO, and you can also reach out to a program officer if you'd like to discuss your particular case. We're happy to talk about that. And I encourage you to join us for the Q&A session on June 27th, because this topic is sure to come up. As you make the choice between planning and implementation, you might want to see how previous recipients have presented their programs, and we publish sample proposals on the NEH website. This screenshot shows you what's under Step 1 at the bottom of the program page. This is where you can download the PDF of the NOFO and also where you can see specific projects that this program has funded. Under Program Resources, you'll see links to recently funded projects, and there are separate links for the planning and implementation levels. This will give you a complete list of what we funded in the last few years, including the title of the grant, the institution to which it was awarded, and a one-paragraph description of the project. I encourage you to look at that list to get a sense of the range of projects that have been successfully proposed in the past, but keep in mind it's not exclusive. You probably have a great idea that might be different. The section heading below that is sample application narratives. Again, there are groups, one for planning awards and one for implementation awards. We intend these as samples rather than models, so you'll notice slight differences among them, but they'll give you a good sense of what's required and the different ways the information can be presented within the guidelines we provide. Speaking of the guidelines and what your application must include, that's also something you can find in the NOFO. So let's talk about the proposal parts. Section D of the NOFO tells you how to craft and submit your application. When reviewers see your proposal, they see a single PDF. But when you upload it, you'll do so in several parts. And the table on page 9 of the NOFO lists the attachments which you'll need to have ready when you upload your application. So I'll explain these parts individually, but remember that they should all work together. Think of your proposal as a unified argument for why your project deserves to be funded by the NEH. You won't be in the room to explain yourself, so make sure your proposal makes the strongest case. You want to be strategic, you want to be explicit, and you want to be clear. The core of the proposal is the application narrative, which is the first thing reviewers see after the cover page. The narrative must be 8 pages or less for planning grants, or 10 pages maximum for implementation. It's okay to single space, but your planning grant cannot go onto a 9th page. Applications over the limit are removed from the pool, so no matter how good your proposal is, we won't get a chance to see it. The narrative tells the story of who you are as an institution within your academic programs or areas, what kinds of students you have, and how you are trying to serve them, of where things stand now with regard to the humanities at your institutions, and of where you want to be and the future you want to build, and how your proposed project will use the time and funding from this grant opportunity to get there. As you write your narrative, you'll use headings that are listed in the NOFO, and you should carefully address or answer each of the items listed in each one. You should also write your narrative so that a generalist scholar can understand it. That's because we recruit peer reviewers from across the humanities to evaluate proposals. So let's look at the review criteria. When we ask reviewers to read your proposal, we require them to use these 3 criteria: intellectual quality, design quality and feasibility, and impact. We list these criteria in the NOFO along with the description of each one, and you should keep that list in mind as you write your narrative. Intellectual quality stands first and foremost among these equals, because if your project isn't worth doing in terms of its intellectual significance, then it won't matter how organized you are or how many students it might affect. But if you do have a great intellectual focus for your project, you also have to combine that with a feasible design that can get the job done and that will have a significant impact. So they're all important to address fully in your application. In general, look at what's written there and be sure that an intelligent reader will have strong, positive answers to how well your proposal addresses each of them. Ideally, they'll be won over by the time they finish reading your narrative, and then their positive assessment will be strengthened by what they find in the other attachments that follow it. So now we'll turn things over to my colleague Sarah, who will explain one other and very important part of your application, and will also tell you how to submit it to NEH.
Thank you, Hannah. When you are ready to submit your application, you will be doing so through grants.gov. The link to the grants.gov page is just below the link for the NOFO on the NEH website. The link will take you to a page that looks something like this. Hannah described the attachments that you need to have ready to upload when you log into grants.gov. You will also need to be ready to fill out some forms that will complete your application. The very first thing you should do after this webinar is ensure that you have two important things: an active unique identity identifier and current registrations and passwords for grants.gov. You may need to confirm this with your grants office. Registration can take up to a month to complete, so check on this straight away, especially if you're a first-time applicant or if your institution hasn't applied for federal funding in a few years. NEH cannot grant deadline extensions for delayed registrations. Remember, you are applying as an institution, so you will need to have the proper roles and authorities assigned to you in grants.gov to access and apply through your institution's application workspace. Your institutional grant administrator or other grant management or sponsored program staff at your institution are great contacts for guidance if you're not sure where to find this information or who to contact for access. When you're in grants.gov, be sure to select the appropriate package for the level that you intend to apply for, so your application is evaluated appropriately. That is, be sure to select the AKA prefix for planning and the AKB prefix for implementation. Selecting the wrong one can be a very common error, so be sure to double check with your grant administrator that you've got the correct package. Now we're going to look at the budget form. The budget form is one of the most important forms you'll fill out in grants.gov. It's the research and related budget form. You'll fill out this in your grants.gov workspace when you begin your application. The top of the budget form looks something like this screenshot. This form will automatically integrate into your application based on what you enter here. Your budget can include costs necessary to complete your project. You will include compensation for your project team and may also provide stipends for consultants or for faculty workshops. Those are the most common budget items, and the NOFO explains what other costs can be included and how you should list them on the form. The budget form is used for all federal grant programs, and so not every part will be relevant to your project. Be sure to read the NOFO guidelines on how exactly to fill it out for this specific grant program's purposes. You can see pages 16 through 25 of the NOFO. I know there's a lot of detail there, but don't let it overwhelm you. Many applicants find it helpful to reach out to their grants office for guidance. All projects are required to submit a budget justification to complement the budget form itself. The budget justification is attached as part of the budget form. Be sure to title this file correctly and save it as a PDF to ensure that it successfully integrates into the application file that our reviewers will see. As you prepare for your budget, you should keep in mind a few things that NEH cannot fund with a Humanities Connections Award. You can find a more complete listing of funding restrictions on pages 28 and 29 of the NOFO, but I want to caution you against some of the most common pitfalls that we see. The Humanities Connections Award grant cannot fund the isolated addition or revision of a single course offering, the simple pairing of complementary courses, faculty or student travel abroad, and costs for social events. Also, never charge alcohol to federal budgets. That's always prohibited. Some other general funding restrictions. So those restrictions I just listed are specific to Humanities Connections. Additionally, no NEH award can fund the promotion of particular political, religious, or ideological points of view, advocacy for a particular program of social or political action, or support of specific public policies or legislation. And even at this kind of cross-disciplinary grant program, the NEH cannot fund projects whose main focus falls entirely outside of the humanities. Collaborating across boundaries is great, but if these sorts of areas are your project's main thrust, you may want to be looking at the NEA or NSF or to nonprofits that support that kind of work rather than the NEH. If you're unsure whether your project runs into one or more of these restrictions, I encourage you to reach out to us and we can discuss it with you. Finally, we're going to go over some key dates. Now you know what to do to get started on your application, and here's a timeline on some of when to do it. Again, I hope you can join us for the live Q&A on June 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You'll find a link to join the meeting on the program page. We are accepting optional draft proposals or materials for feedback until July 25th. This is approximately 6 weeks ahead of the submission deadline. If you have a full draft of the narrative, we're happy to review that. You can send drafts or other attachments that are most relevant, such as the work plan and readings, if you like, but which may be looked at alongside the narrative if time permits. But it's also fine if you don't have a full draft ready by the date, but you would like to get feedback from a program officer that can help you strengthen your application. You can send a project summary or work plan draft, a partial draft that lets us know the direction you're intending, whatever you want us to see at that point. We're ready to meet you where you are and respond within a time frame that allows you to incorporate that feedback. Final applications are due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on September 5th. Please don't wait until the last minute in case of technical issues and to account for processing time to validate in the grants.gov system. And now back to PC.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you all for watching this video. If you have questions about the program, we have several additional resources. We publish answers to frequently asked questions, which you can find on the program page, just below the link to download the NOFO. As Sarah mentioned, I hope you'll join us on June 27th for a live Q&A session about this program. And you can also email us, either at the program address, hc@neh.gov, or directly at our own inboxes, which you'll see here. And don't forget, as with most NEH grants, you can send us those drafts or draft proposals, anything like that in advance. This year's draft deadline is July 25th. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.